Hey there, y'all. Good afternoon. It is Peter Barclay here, host of the True North Sports Talk podcast that we are about to do. Also, host of your 3-minute drill every night, your daily recap of the day in sports. And I will see you later on when we do that today. Now, the topic for today's episode, and hopefully will only be maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, so it'll be a bit of a shorter episode, but we're gonna get into some good stuff. And yeah, we're gonna talk about the NBA today. Now, this is a topic we haven't got a whole lot into yet on the podcast, but the reason we're doing this podcast is the NBA recently held the draft lottery. And so we're going to talk about this a little bit today. Hopefully the only time I'm looking at the screens behind me will be just to list off the draft order that we're going to see when the draft comes along. And we'll do another episode down the line to get you ready for the draft so that you know what predictions may be, who we think is going where, all that kind of stuff. But for today, we're going to look at the draft order, we're going to talk about the lottery, and I'm going to give you some opinions, and maybe you'll like them, maybe you won't, maybe they'll be a bit controversial, but I'm going to suggest a change in how the NBA does its drafting. So just a little tease as to what we'll get into later on down the line. And so first off, let's take a look at the results of the ping pong balls. So, being north of the border in Canada here, the ping pong balls didn't exactly land friendly to the Toronto Raptors. Now, this is a fairly common theme when it comes to the Raptors and their drafting position. Now, there was one time since 1995, when by default of being an expansion team, they got the first overall pick. 2006, they had the first overall pick. That was the one time the ping pong balls went our way. And the sad part is about that draft is management for the Raptors at the time severely bungled that draft. There were many guys that came out of that draft that should have been taken number one. And so we're going to take a look at least some of the people that the Raptors could have taken here. And unfortunately, this means I'm going to be looking at my screen a little bit more than I wanted to. Now, so just right off the hop, most Raptor fans wanted LaMarcus Aldridge. He was like the big fish in that draft. And he turned out to have a extremely solid career. Now, unfortunately, he wouldn't still be playing in this day and age if we had drafted him. But let's take a look. So, unfortunately, 2006, the Raptors drafted Andrea Bargnani. Snooze. That was probably next to the 84 draft that brought us Michael Jordan. That was one of the most bungled number one overall picks in the history of the NBA. And so let's see. We mentioned LaMarcus Aldridge. I'm seeing Brandon Roy at number 6, JJ Redick at 11, Rudy Gay at 8, Rajon Rondo at 21, Kyle Lowry at 24, and fans of the Raptors, you know what Kyle Lowry turned into for the Raptors. We could have had him a whole lot earlier than we did. May not have worked out as well, just based on the timing. Let's see who else was in this draft. PJ Tucker is still playing. He's played for the Raptors several times. In fact, that year he was drafted by the Raptors. Wouldn't have taken him number 1. But yeah, so that was a pretty weak draft overall. And I think that's why they gave it to the Raptors number 1, is simply because it's not like there was a Steph Curry in that draft. LaMarcus Aldridge, again, at number 2, really should have been the number 1 overall pick to Toronto. So that's just one of the highlights as to why, for myself especially, I see that there is a rather large issue with how the draft works. Now, again, even in this year's draft, immediately afterwards, seeing who won the draft lottery, they didn't win it. Most people that I've come in contact with or seen discussing it, the winners of this year's lottery were gifted that. And you say, well, Peter, how can you come to that conclusion? If you look at the last 3, if not more times, that a player of Luka Doncic's caliber has been traded to the Los Angeles market, whether it be the Clippers or the Lakers, the team sending said player tends to end up with the number 1 overall pick in that year's draft. Don't believe me? Go back and look at the history. Chris Paul sent to the Clippers. Who got the first overall pick in that draft? That became, let's see, that was the New Orleans Hornets, and they ended up with the number 1 overall pick. Again, teams that traded players. Look at Luka this year. The team he came from got the number 1 overall pick. And I'm racking my brain trying to remember what the third one in that post was. Boo. I apologize. However, there were at least 3 examples, and you can go check this. Fact check it, please. That at least 3 examples of players of that caliber being traded to the Los Angeles market, and their former team ended up with the number 1 overall pick. So that tells you this year, the winner of the lottery was the Dallas Mavericks. And they had a very small margin to win the draft lottery. If you go by the numbers, they should have only had around a 2% chance of winning the draft. Now, the Raptors, while the margins weren't gigantic, but the difference was 7%. They had a 9% chance of winning the draft ahead of the Dallas Mavericks. Teams like San Antonio, Philadelphia, Charlotte, they all had higher odds of winning the lottery. And they'll just point to that and be like, oh, see, that gives every team hope that even if you have small odds, you could still win the lottery and get a number 1 overall pick. Well, there's 2 issues with that. 1, the smaller your odds, you shouldn't be winning this often. Number 2 is even still this idea of tanking to get the best player in the draft. Now, the Blue Jays, the Raptors are perfect examples. You can get the number 1 overall pick. Portland Trailblazers, you can get the number 1 overall pick and you can bungle the crap out of it. And there was another team behind Portland in that 84 draft that also bungled that draft, because none of those teams took Michael Jordan. Now, here's the thing. This is the issue with the lottery itself. It's meant to build suspense. It gives them TV filler time to have this lottery. Hey, we're going to put a half-hour show on. We're going to make it suspenseful, even though pretty much everyone knew it was going to be Dallas this year. Dallas knew it was going to be Dallas this year because they towed the line for the NBA and sent Luka to Los Angeles. So that when LeBron retires, which most honest NBA fans think should be this year, and his son Bronny should fade into the background after that, because he's clearly not ready for the NBA yet. But that's the thing. We'll see where this goes. But that's what we're looking at. We can't have this continue in the NBA. Most people, if they look at a lot of these leagues, it sure looks like there's a script that's being followed here. So, let's take a look at the first round. We have your number 1 overall pick, as we alluded to, the Dallas Mavericks. Number 2 turned out to be San Antonio, which makes sense. They were down near the bottom. Although Washington probably should have been up there near the top. So 3rd, Philadelphia 76ers. 4th, Charlotte Hornets. 5th, Utah Jazz. 6, Washington Wizards. 7, New Orleans Pelicans. 8 is the Brooklyn Nets. 9, up here in Canada, our Toronto Raptors. 10 was a pick that the Houston Rockets traded for. 11 was the Trailblazers. 12 was the Chicago Bulls. Atlanta traded for this pick that they have, ended up at 13. And the last one for the lottery was San Antonio Spurs, a pick they traded for from Atlanta. So now we go on to finish out the draft order in the first round, and this is just based on how it was meant to go. And a lot of these picks, I'm not going to mention where all of them came from because it gets a bit convoluted. Because you'll get one like 22 at Atlanta from Los Angeles that Los Angeles got from New Orleans. Right? So there's a lot of vias and all that kind of stuff that we don't need to necessarily get into. So 15 is Oklahoma City, 16 Orlando, 17 Minnesota, 18 Washington, 19 Brooklyn, 20 Miami, 21 Utah, 22 Atlanta, Indiana at 23, Oklahoma again at 24, Orlando 25, Brooklyn 26 and 27, Boston 28, Phoenix 29, and the LA Clippers rounding out the first round at 30. So when we get into the second round here, you got Minnesota 31, Boston 32, Charlotte 33 and 34, Philadelphia 35, 36 Brooklyn, 37 Detroit, San Antonio at 38. You have Toronto again, a pick that they traded for at 39. Washington 40, Golden State 41, Sacramento 42, Utah 43, 44 is Oklahoma, 45 Chicago, 46 Orlando, 47 Milwaukee, 48 Memphis, 49 Cleveland, 50 New York, 51 LA, 52 Phoenix, 53 Utah, 54 Indiana, 55 the Los Angeles Lakers, 56 Memphis, 57 Orlando, 58 Cleveland, 59 is Houston. Alright, so some key things to remember now that we've established what the draft order is, and we've talked about the draft lottery. So some key dates coming up in the NBA leading up to the draft itself. So from May 11th, so up until today, they've been holding the draft combine. May 12th, we had the lottery. The 15th was the early entry withdrawal deadline. So for college players that were early entrants into the NBA draft, if they feel like maybe their stock fell or they weren't going to be looked at by teams, they could re-enter back into college. June 25th, so that was June 15th for that. June 25th is going to be the first round of the draft, and June 26th is going to be the second round of the draft. So write those down, come back, rewatch the episode if you need to, and that's going to be your dates coming up in regard to the draft. So, we'll talk a little bit about the lottery. And we've already talked about some of the issues with it. I'm going to propose a solution. And then I'm going to tell you why I think this is a good solution. So, the worst team in the league was meant to receive the first overall pick in order to help that worst team to get better so that they could start rebuilding and grow into a stronger team. That's what it was meant for. So let's take a look at the standings. So in the Eastern Conference, let's see if we can... Okay, so Washington was at 18 and 64. Let's see if there's a worse team. Yes, the Utah Jazz should have, by former rules, had the first overall pick in the draft at 17 and 65. The number 2 team that received the second overall pick should have been the Washington Wizards. Now, if we went back and looked at that chart, unfortunately, that's not how things went when it came to the draft lottery. So with the 7th, 5th, 4th pick, you're not getting the best of the best players. And you'd say, yeah, but you're still going to get a good player, this and that. But that's not the spirit of what the draft was meant, the way it's laid out was meant to work. And so you have teams like the Pelicans, the Spurs, in the West, and in the East you have your Hornets and your 76ers that were way down at the bottom. Even the Raptors in the East, they were only 30 and 52. I mean, they kind of played themselves out of full tank mode, as it were, but I mean, these bottom feeding teams really have been done a disservice because, let's see, the Mavericks had 9 more wins than the Toronto Raptors. They had, let's see, 10, 22 more wins than the Utah Jazz. And you're telling me Dallas deserves that number 1 overall pick? I don't think so, son. That's not how this game was supposed to work. And with the draft lottery, that allows the NBA, in a sense, to choose whatever team they want to get that number 1 overall pick. And it just doesn't work that way. It shouldn't. And we've heard about teams tanking to get players, such as, a good example, a team may have tanked to get LeBron or Zion Williams or Blake Griffin or Shaquille O'Neal. That's what's wrong with the system. And we hear it across sports, with the exception of maybe the NFL, baseball is too convoluted to really tank and change your team that quickly. But you hear it in hockey, you hear it in basketball, you even hear it in soccer a little bit. But the thing about it is that why are you going to make yourself lose to get a player like a Connor Bedard? That shouldn't be your goal going into a season. It's like, okay, we know this draft coming up is going to be strong. There's going to be a lot of good players. We're going to be terrible, so we get the best of them. What? Huh? As a fan, and especially one from that city, you should feel cheated. Because your team is not doing everything they can to win games. Because these games are meant to be played in a way where everyone competes every single night. On top of that, the officiating is done in such a way that they keep certain teams down to the point where players are now even calling out officials, saying things like, I know what the spread is and I see what you're doing. So if players can see it and know what's going on, as leagues out there, being the NBA, the NHL, NFL, Major League Baseball, do you think we're dumb enough not to know what you're doing as fans? Do you think I don't know why Angel Hernandez in the major leagues had a job for so long? Yes, he was a horrible umpire, but it was with purpose. He was following the script, as are many of the ones who are still not that good, which is why so many fans really want to see what we saw in spring training, where the umpires are called out on the Jumbotron of every single stadium across the league and keeping them honest. So that's what we're looking for here with the draft lottery too. How do we keep the NBA, the owners, the general managers, and these teams honest? How do we do that? One, you get rid of the draft lottery. Done. It's over. It's out. No more draft lottery. So then who gets to pick first? How do you make the bad teams better? Well, what's the goal of an NBA season? Is it not the Larry O'Brien Trophy? What's the goal in the NHL? Is it not the Stanley Cup? What's the goal in Major League Baseball? Is it not the World Series? Or the Super Bowl? Or the Grey Cup? So how do you incentivize teams to always win? How do you incentivize players who get paid gargantuan amounts of money compared to you and me, even though it's taxed by 50%, so don't get it twisted, they don't make as much as the contract numbers state. And then on top of that, they got to pay their team. So again, yeah, they're not making quite as much as is made out to be, but they're still making way more than I've ever seen in a year for work. So how do you get those guys not to take days off? How do you get the Michael Jordans that take pride in the fact that they play all 82 games in a season, X amount of times, and the only time they took games off, either they had to or there was an injury that didn't allow it that was legit. In the case of Michael in 86. So, how do you accomplish this? I have a very simple proposition for you. And you might think, how is it fair to the not as good teams? But I challenge you. Think on this. The best way, in order to challenge every team to win as many games as possible, the Larry O'Brien Trophy winner, so the NBA champion, so in 2019 it would have been the Toronto Raptors, they would get the number 1 overall pick in that summer's draft. So why does this work? Because if you want the number 1 overall pick to make your team better, you better find a way to win as many games as possible without cheating to get that number 1 overall pick. Because unless you are in that championship, so the 16 teams in the playoffs, they get the first 16 overall picks. So you have incentive then to be one of those teams to get the best players possible to make your team even better. And if you're the best team, that gives you the best chance to stay good for even longer. Think on that. Stanley Cup winner from last year, the Florida Panthers. What if they had the number 1 overall pick in last summer's draft? I'm just saying, they would be a much better team because of it. They may not have had to go out and get a Brad Marchand at the trade deadline because of that player they chose. So here's the thing. I challenge any major sports league that may ever come across this video. Take what I'm saying to heart. Maybe even a pundit comes across this video somehow. Charles Barkley, a Shaq. Maybe one of those guys comes across this video and says, hey, you know what? I could start putting this on TV, that this would be a wise change to make. I don't know, but think about that. Because that's a way to incentivize winning and for your players to show up every single day and want to play. Sadly, I was a fan in 2019 of the Toronto Raptors, and I watched the load management go on with Kawhi Leonard. And the unfortunate part about that year is the media made a huge, gigantic thing about it because of the way he exited San Antonio. And then you see how effective it was in the fact that even if you go back and look at that team was dynamite. They had a starting 5 of Kyle Lowry, Kawhi Leonard, Danny Green, and Serge Ibaka with Marc Gasol. Coming off of their bench was Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, and you also had Serge Ibaka or Chris Boucher or any of these other guys coming off the bench in order to play when the other guys needed rest. So they had a dynamite team that year with Kawhi Leonard there. So that's why they really actually won. But because they won, every other team in the league went, oh, load management works. Let's us do that too, because all these leagues are copycat leagues. Not knowing that Kawhi Leonard learned that load management from the fact that Greg Popovich used to sit Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker later in their career, not at the beginning, but as they got older, in order to help them maintain their strength and conditioning for the playoffs as they got older to stretch out the window. So, this is the thing, is that I'm hoping this system would discourage that type of treatment, except for extenuating circumstances like the ones that Kawhi Leonard experienced with his injuries. But ever since 2019, when he chose to sign with the Los Angeles Clippers, that particular treatment of Kawhi never should have continued, because he would have been fully healed by then. And that way, other teams would have been disincentivized to continue that model. So, that's my 2 cents on how to do the draft. No matter what league you're in, have the champion get the first overall pick, and that incentivizes each team to win. And you will never see tanking again on purpose. It may happen where a team's just that bad. Okay, fine. But if you're trying to be that bad, trading away players and cutting payroll and just trying to be that bad, not everyone can be the Oakland Athletics, where they just don't have the money to be any good. But you will see teams try a whole heck of a lot harder to win if they have to win the championship to get the number 1 overall pick. I challenge you, try it. One league, try it, and you'll see all the rest of them fall in line. Anywho, that's my 2 cents worth and my thoughts on the NBA draft. You're up to date on what the draft order is and how the lottery went. Alright guys, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I will see you on the next episode of True North Sports Talk Podcast. Sayonara.